In 1968, something unthinkable happened deep beneath the world's oceans. 4 submarines from 4 different nations vanished within just 4 months. No distress signals, no survivors, no explanations. These weren't aging relics from an earlier era. They were advanced, cutting-edge vessels crewed by experienced sailors. And yet, one by one, they disappeared without a trace, leaving behind silence and questions that remain unanswered to this day. Was it coincidence? Or was something far more disturbing happening beneath the surface of our planet's seas? By the end of this story, you'll hear about the evidence uncovered in the aftermath and the chilling mysteries that still surround these disappearances. Mysteries that have defied logic, technology, and decades of investigation. It began with the INS Dakar, originally a British T-class submarine that had served in World War II. The vessel had been refitted and upgraded by the late 1960s, transforming it into one of the most advanced submarines of its kind. Israel had purchased the Dakar and spent months modernizing it before entrusting it to a seasoned crew of 69 men. They were proud, capable, and fully confident in their ship. On January 9, 1968, the Dakar departed Portsmouth, England, on what was supposed to be a straightforward voyage to Haifa, Israel. Less than 3 weeks at sea, nothing out of the ordinary. For most of the journey, everything went smoothly. The Dakar maintained regular radio contact, transmitting reports on its position and progress. Then, on the night of January 24th, as it neared the eastern Mediterranean, it sent a routine message. Nothing seemed wrong. The crew reported calm seas and normal operation. Then came silence, no further messages, no distress call. By January 25th, the Dakar was officially missing. Israel launched one of the largest search and rescue missions in its naval history. Dozens of ships, aircraft, and sonar-equipped vessels joined in, aided by the United States and other allied forces. They scoured the Mediterranean from the coast of Crete to the shores of Israel, listening for any sign of life, an emergency beacon, debris, even an oil slick. There was nothing. The sea had simply swallowed the Dakar whole. Weeks turned into months, and speculation ran wild. Some believed it had suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure. Others whispered about a collision, a torpedo accident, or even an attack. The Cold War was in full swing, and with tensions between Israel, the Soviet Union, and its allies running high, conspiracy theories spread fast. But with no wreckage and no survivors, there was nothing to prove or disprove anything. For more than 30 years, the Dakar remained one of the ocean's great mysteries. Then in 1999, an American search team finally found her, resting nearly 10,000 feet below the surface, halfway between Crete and Cyprus. The hull was shattered, the evidence suggesting a sudden catastrophic implosion. There were no signs of combat, no explosion, no external damage from weapons. Whatever happened had come from within. The ocean had claimed her quietly, efficiently, completely. And yet, the Dakar was only the beginning. Just days after her disappearance, another submarine vanished, this time belonging to the French Navy. The Minerve set out from Toulon on January 27, 1968, on a training mission in the Mediterranean with 52 crew members on board. The weather was rough, but nothing beyond what an experienced crew could handle. As she surfaced for a routine radio check, she suddenly lost contact. Within minutes, she was gone. Searches began immediately, but like the Dakar, the Minerve had vanished without a trace. The French Navy scoured hundreds of miles of ocean, using every available resource. But the sea gave up nothing. No debris, no signals, no clue to what had gone wrong. For decades, the mystery lingered. Only in 2019, more than 50 years later, was the wreck finally located off the coast of Toulon. It lay over 7,000 feet deep, astonishingly well preserved. The cause? Still uncertain. Engineers believe it may have suffered a mechanical failure during its dive. But no one can say for sure. And then came March, in the icy North Atlantic. The Soviet submarine K-129 set sail from its base in Kamchatka. It was a nuclear-armed ballistic missile sub, one of the most formidable weapons of the Cold War. Its mission was to patrol silently in the Pacific, part of the USSR's nuclear deterrent force. But in early March 1968, K-129 disappeared. Unlike the Dakar and the Minerve, this loss had terrifying implications. The K-129 carried nuclear warheads, 3 ballistic missiles, each armed and ready. When it failed to check in, the Soviet Navy panicked. The Kremlin feared the worst, an accident or worse, a confrontation with the United States. The Americans were equally on edge. Both sides scoured the Pacific in secret, each suspecting the other of foul play. It took months before American naval intelligence, using deep-sea listening networks, identified a faint acoustic anomaly, a massive underwater explosion recorded northwest of Hawaii around the same time K-129 vanished. The U.S. Navy quietly pinpointed the wreck nearly 16,000 feet below the surface. What followed was one of the most secretive operations of the Cold War. The CIA launched Project Azorian, an ambitious mission to raise part of the wreck in complete secrecy using a specially built ship, the Glomar Explorer. In 1974, under the guise of a deep-sea mining project, the U.S. managed to recover a portion of the K-129's hull, bringing back the bodies of several Soviet sailors. But much of the sub remained on the ocean floor. The official story claimed a mechanical failure caused the disaster, but the Soviets never accepted that explanation. Rumors of collision, sabotage, even an accidental missile launch persist to this day. And then came the final blow. In May 1968, just 2 months after the loss of K-129, tragedy struck again, this time for the United States. The USS Scorpion, a nuclear-powered attack submarine, was returning home to Norfolk, Virginia, after a mission in the Atlantic. On May 21st, she sent a brief transmission reporting her position. Everything appeared normal, then silence. The Navy waited, then feared the worst. 2 days later, the Scorpion failed to arrive at port. It was declared missing, with 99 men on board. Months of searching followed before sonar records revealed a massive acoustic event in the mid-Atlantic, an underwater explosion eerily similar to the one recorded with K-129. In October 1968, the wreck was finally found at a depth of 10,000 feet. Like the Dakar, it appeared to have imploded suddenly. The cause remains one of the Navy's most enduring mysteries. Some believe a torpedo malfunctioned and detonated inside the hull. Others suspect electrical failure, but conspiracy theorists point to the timing. 4 submarines from 4 nations, lost within 4 months. It's almost impossible not to see the pattern. Britain, Israel, France, the Soviet Union, and the United States, all struck by the same kind of tragedy in the same brief window of time. Statistically, the odds are astronomical. No war was declared, no enemy was identified, and yet the world's oceans became graveyards for hundreds of sailors. Even decades later, the coincidences still trouble naval historians. All 4 submarines vanished in deep water under mysterious circumstances during a period of intense Cold War tension and technological experimentation. Some whisper of shared design flaws or untested sonar interference. Others speak quietly of deeper forces, natural anomalies, magnetic disturbances, or phenomena we still don't understand. Whatever the truth, 1968 remains the most tragic and confounding year in the history of submarine warfare. 4 vessels gone, 4 nations scarred, and oceans that have yet to give up all their secrets. What really happened beneath the waves that year may never be known. But if the sea could speak, it would tell a story both haunting and human, one of ambition, fear, and the price of pushing too far into the deep. The Mediterranean was searched for weeks, but it was as if the INS Dakar had been swallowed whole by the sea. No oil slick, no debris, no signal, nothing. For decades, families of the 69 crew members waited, haunted by the question of what really happened beneath those calm blue waters. It wasn't until 1999, more than 30 years later, that the mystery finally resurfaced. A joint expedition led by the U.S. company Nauticus and the Israeli Navy located the wreck, lying nearly 3,000 meters below the surface, between Cyprus and Crete. The hull was broken clean in two, resting silently on the seabed. There were no signs of combat damage or explosion, but the reason for the disaster remains a mystery. Some experts believe a catastrophic mechanical failure doomed the vessel, while others suspect a mid-sea collision or even sabotage. Yet to this day, no definitive cause has ever been proven. The ocean keeps its secrets well, and then, just 2 days after the Dakar vanished, another submarine disappeared. This time, it belonged to France. The Minerve was a modern diesel-electric submarine, sleek and reliable, commissioned only a few years earlier in 1964. It was considered one of the French Navy's most dependable vessels. Small but agile, designed for quick dives and short-range coastal patrols. On January 27, 1968, the Minerve left port to conduct a routine training exercise just a few miles off the coast of Toulon, France. The crew of 52 men expected to be back within hours. That morning, the Mediterranean was restless. Winds howled across the waves, churning the sea into a white-tipped frenzy. But conditions like that weren't unusual, and the Minerve had handled worse. At 7:55 a.m., the submarine sent what would be its final message, reporting its position and estimated time of arrival. Everything was normal. Minutes later, it vanished. No distress call, no emergency signal, nothing but silence. The French Navy immediately launched a massive search operation. Ships, aircraft, and sonar crews combed the waters off Toulon for any sign of the missing sub. Even Jacques Cousteau joined the effort, deploying his team's advanced equipment to scour the seafloor. But despite their combined expertise, not a single trace of the Minerve could be found. It was as though the vessel had slipped into another world. For over 50 years, her fate remained one of the Mediterranean's most haunting enigmas. Families waited without answers, clinging to hope long after logic had faded. Then in 2019, new sonar technology finally succeeded where generations of searchers had failed. The wreck was located about 45 kilometers south of Toulon, resting more than 2,300 meters beneath the surface. When images of the Minerve appeared on the monitors, they stunned even seasoned investigators. The submarine lay broken but largely intact, preserved by the cold and darkness. There was no evidence of an explosion or fire, only the quiet, crushing weight of the deep. Experts suggested a sudden mechanical malfunction or structural failure, possibly triggered by the violent weather that morning, but others weren't convinced. How could such an advanced, well-maintained vessel simply vanish within minutes, without even enough time to send a distress call? The discovery brought long-awaited closure to grieving families, but it also reopened old questions. Why did two submarines from two nations disappear within the same week under eerily similar circumstances? Coincidence seemed possible, but with what happened next, coincidence began to feel impossible. The wreck of the Minerve revealed evidence of a sudden, catastrophic event, most likely caused by a mechanical failure or the violent turbulence from the stormy conditions that day. Without a full on-site investigation, however, the exact cause remains uncertain. What made the Minerve's disappearance especially haunting was how close she had been to home. Unlike the Dakar, which vanished in the open Mediterranean, the Minerve went down within sight of her own port, just a few miles from safety. 52 sailors, gone in an instant, 2 submarines lost in less than a week. The Mediterranean, usually calm and predictable, had suddenly become the setting for 2 of the Cold War's most chilling maritime mysteries. For years, both nations searched for answers, but the sea remained silent. And while investigators in Europe struggled to make sense of what had happened, something even stranger was unfolding half a world away, in the vast, frigid expanse of the Pacific Ocean. This time, it wasn't a small diesel-electric vessel. It was a Soviet nuclear submarine, one of the most dangerous machines ever built, the K-129. The K-129 was a Golf II class ballistic missile submarine, part of the Soviet Union's elite strategic deterrent force. She carried 3 nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles, each capable of obliterating a city. On February 24, 1968, the submarine departed from the Rybachi naval base near Petropavlovsk in the far eastern USSR for what was supposed to be a routine patrol in the North Pacific. As with most Cold War missions, everything about the operation was classified. The K-129 slipped beneath the waves and disappeared into the deep, cruising silently through the darkness like a ghost. For several weeks, everything seemed routine. She was due to check in periodically with Soviet Naval Command, but sometime in early March, the transmissions stopped. At first, officials in Moscow assumed it was a communication failure, not uncommon for submarines operating deep underwater. But as hours turned to days and no word came, concern quickly grew into alarm. A massive search operation was ordered. More than 40 Soviet ships and dozens of aircraft combed an area of the Pacific roughly the size of the continental United States. Desperately looking for any trace of their missing vessel, there was nothing, no debris, no signal, no survivors. It was as if the K-129 had simply ceased to exist, but the disappearance hadn't gone entirely unnoticed. Thousands of miles away, the United States Navy operated an advanced underwater listening network known as SOSUS, a system of hydrophones designed to detect submarine movements and underwater explosions across the globe. In early March, those sensors recorded something unusual, a massive acoustic event deep in the North Pacific, northwest of Hawaii. It sounded like a sudden implosion, an entire vessel crushed under the pressure of the deep. American analysts triangulated the signal and determined that the explosion had occurred almost exactly where the K-129 was thought to be patrolling. Quietly, the U.S. Navy concluded that the Soviet sub had gone down, taking its nuclear weapons, its crew of 98 men, and its secrets with it. The Soviets, however, found nothing. They never publicly admitted to losing the K-129, and for years the incident remained one of the Cold War's most closely guarded secrets. But behind the scenes, the Americans saw an opportunity, an unprecedented chance to retrieve not just a lost submarine, but also Soviet nuclear technology. What followed was one of the most ambitious and secretive salvage missions in history, Project Azorian. Using a specially designed ship called the Glomar Explorer, disguised as a deep-sea mining vessel, the CIA attempted to recover the wreck from more than 16,000 feet below the surface, a depth no salvage operation had ever reached before. The operation took years to plan and cost over $500 million. In 1974, the mission began. Working in total secrecy, the Glomar Explorer managed to lift part of the submarine's remains to the surface. Among the recovered wreckage were the bodies of several Soviet sailors who were given a burial at sea with full military honors. But much of the K-129 broke apart during the lift and fell back into the abyss, taking most of its secrets with it. To this day, neither the United States nor Russia has ever publicly confirmed exactly what was found. Some say the CIA recovered nuclear missile guidance systems and cryptographic equipment. Others claim they found nothing of real value. Officially, the cause of the disaster was labeled a catastrophic mechanical failure. But that explanation never fully satisfied anyone. The timing, the secrecy, and the sheer number of submarines lost that year made the world uneasy. Because even as the Soviets mourned the K-129, tragedy was already preparing to strike again, this time in the Atlantic Ocean. And this time, it would be America's turn. For weeks, Soviet ships and aircraft swept across thousands of miles of open water, but despite the scale of the effort, there was no sign of the K-129, not a single piece of debris. Not a trace of oil, nothing. The Soviet Navy was baffled. A submarine of that size, carrying nuclear missiles and advanced technology, didn't just disappear unless something catastrophic had occurred. Unbeknownst to them, the United States Navy already had a clue. Deep beneath the Pacific, the U.S. maintained a top-secret underwater listening network known as SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System, designed during the Cold War to track Soviet submarines and detect underwater explosions. In early March 1968, those sensors picked up something unusual, a deep, far-reaching acoustic event northwest of Hawaii. Recorded on March 8, 1968. The sound was unmistakable, a violent explosion, followed by the long, echoing rumble of collapsing metal under immense pressure. Analyzing the data, U.S. Naval Intelligence triangulated the source and determined that it matched the area where the K-129 was last believed to be operating. Using that information, American reconnaissance ships secretly located the wreck at a depth of nearly 5,000 meters, more than 3 miles beneath the surface. When the first images came back, they were chilling. The submarine's hull was completely shattered, the pressure hull torn open like paper. Debris was scattered across the seafloor. Whatever had happened, it was instantaneous and absolute. The cause of the disaster remained unclear. Some suspected an onboard explosion, possibly involving a missile or battery malfunction, while others whispered about a collision with an American submarine. For the United States, it was a monumental discovery. For the Soviets, who had no idea the Americans had found their missing sub, it was another dead end. They eventually called off their search, declaring the K-129 lost with all hands. But for U.S. intelligence, the story was far from over. 6 years later, in 1974, the CIA launched one of the most secretive and ambitious operations in history, Project Azorian. The mission's objective was unprecedented: to raise part of the K-129's wreckage from the ocean floor, nearly 5 kilometers deep, without alerting the Soviet Union. This was not just any recovery mission. It was a feat of engineering that had never been attempted before. The CIA poured over $800 million into the project, the equivalent of several billion dollars today. They commissioned the construction of a massive vessel, the Hughes Glomar Explorer, built under the guise of a civilian enterprise, led by eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes. Officially, the ship was said to be part of a deep-sea mining project designed to harvest valuable minerals from the ocean floor. In reality, it was a cover story, one so elaborate that it fooled nearly everyone, including journalists and international observers. Why go to such extraordinary lengths? Because the K-129 was no ordinary wreck. On board were 3 nuclear warheads, encrypted communication systems, and potentially priceless intelligence on Soviet missile technology and naval codes. If the U.S. could recover even part of the submarine, it could gain an unparalleled advantage in the Cold War. In July 1974, the Glomar Explorer arrived at the recovery site. Using an enormous mechanical claw known as the capture vehicle, engineers lowered specialized equipment more than 16,000 feet below the surface, an operation that required precision at the limits of human capability. Over the course of several days, they attempted to lift a section of the wreckage, estimated to weigh thousands of tons. For a time, it seemed the impossible had been achieved. The claw successfully grasped part of the K-129 and began the long ascent toward the surface. But disaster struck midway through the operation. A section of the massive submarine broke apart, slipping from the capture device and falling back into the abyss. Only a portion, roughly 1/3 of the wreck, was ultimately brought aboard. What was recovered remains one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Cold War. Officially, the U.S. claimed that only a small section containing the remains of 6 Soviet sailors was retrieved. They were buried at sea with full military honors, a ceremony recorded on film and quietly returned to Moscow years later. But many insiders believe far more was recovered: missile guidance systems, code books, and possibly nuclear materials. When rumors of the operation began to surface in 1975, the CIA responded with its now infamous phrase, "We can neither confirm nor deny." That statement, the Glomar response, became a cornerstone of modern government secrecy. Even now, nearly 60 years later, no one outside a handful of classified circles knows the full truth of what Project Azorian uncovered. What we do know is that in 1968, the K-129 was one of 4 submarines from 4 nations that vanished under mysterious circumstances, each within just a few months of the other. By the time the K-129 came to rest on the ocean floor, another vessel was already being prepared for its own doomed voyage, the USS Scorpion, an American nuclear submarine bound for tragedy in the Atlantic. The Americans knew the K-129 wasn't just a lost submarine, it was a vault of priceless secrets. If they could recover even fragments of it, they might gain unprecedented insight into the USSR's nuclear technology, encryption systems, and strategic plans. Knowledge that could tilt the balance of the Cold War. The secrecy surrounding Project Azorian was absolute. It was so tightly controlled that even many within the US government had no idea it existed. The operation remained classified for decades, and even today, large portions of it are still redacted or buried under layers of national security restrictions. That veil of silence has only fueled endless speculation about what the CIA truly found on the Pacific Ocean floor. The mission was only partially successful, but even that partial success was staggering. Using a massive claw-like mechanism known as the capture vehicle, engineers aboard the Glomar Explorer managed to lift a section of the K-129's wreckage from a depth of nearly 5 kilometers, a feat no one had ever accomplished before. When the recovered portion was finally brought aboard, it included torpedoes, sections of the control room, and, most hauntingly, the remains of several Soviet sailors. According to declassified accounts, those men were given a burial at sea with full military honors. The ceremony, recorded on film and later shared with Russia decades after the Cold War ended. But beyond those few details, everything else remains hidden. The CIA has never disclosed what else was recovered or what they learned. Some reports suggest the team retrieved nuclear warhead components or encrypted communication devices. Others whisper of something far more extraordinary, technology or intelligence so sensitive that it has remained under lock and key ever since. Official statements remain vague, couched in diplomatic language, avoiding direct answers. Every time investigators or journalists have pressed for details, they've received the same response, a phrase that became famous in American intelligence circles: "We can neither confirm nor deny." That response, known as the Glomar reply, was born from this very mission, a product of the CIA's need to hide the truth behind Project Azorian. And in many ways, that secrecy only deepened the enigma. What exactly did they find that justified such an elaborate billion-dollar operation and decades of silence? As for why the K-129 sank, theories abound, and none have been proven. Some experts argue that it suffered a mechanical malfunction, perhaps a sudden battery explosion or a misfire of one of its own missiles that triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. Others point to the possibility of a collision with an American submarine, specifically the USS Swordfish, which was operating in the Pacific at the same time and later returned to port with unexplained damage. The Soviets, meanwhile, floated a darker explanation. They believed the tragedy may have been the result of sabotage or mutiny, a rogue crew member attempting to defect with nuclear weapons only to trigger the sub's destruction in the process. It was an explosive claim, but like so many Cold War rumors, it was impossible to verify. Whatever truly happened to the K-129, it wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a chilling pattern that unfolded over those same few months in 1968, a year that saw 4 submarines from 4 different nations vanish under mysterious circumstances, just weeks before the K-129 was lost. Israel's INS Dakar and France's Minerve had both disappeared without a trace in the Mediterranean. Each vessel had been in perfect condition. Each had an experienced crew, And each went down with no distress call, no warning, and no survivors. Then, barely 2 months after the K-129 imploded in the Pacific, tragedy struck once more. This time, it was the United States that would lose one of its own, the USS Scorpion, a nuclear attack submarine with 99 sailors on board. Bound for home and never to return, 3 submarines from 3 different nations, each advanced, each commanded by skilled crews, had vanished in the span of months, without a single warning or distress signal. The eerie symmetry of their disappearances left investigators wondering if something more than coincidence was at play. Could there have been an unknown force, some hidden factor beneath the waves, responsible for all 3 losses? No one could say for certain. Whatever secrets the K-129 carried, they remain sealed within its shattered hull, resting silently on the floor of the Pacific, untouched, unexamined, and as impenetrable as the mysteries that claimed the other submarines of 1968. And then came the final tragedy, the USS Scorpion. Of all the submarines lost that fateful year, the Scorpion's story is the best documented and perhaps the most haunting of them all. The Scorpion was a skipjack-class nuclear-powered attack submarine, one of the U.S. Navy's most advanced war machines. Sleek, fast, and lethal, she was designed for one purpose: to hunt and destroy enemy submarines. At the height of the Cold War, that mission carried enormous weight. Every patrol was part of a global chess match between superpowers, where one wrong move could trigger disaster. In May 1968, the Scorpion was returning home to Norfolk, Virginia, after a 2-month deployment in the Mediterranean. During that time, she had tracked Soviet ships, monitored submarine activity, and gathered intelligence, routine duties on paper, but anything but routine in the high-stakes shadow war playing out beneath the sea. On May 21st, the Scorpion sent what would be her final transmission. The message was calm, professional, and uneventful. The crew reported their position and provided their estimated arrival time at Norfolk. Everything seemed normal. The submarine was on schedule. 5 days later, on May 26th, the Scorpion failed to arrive. No radio contact, no distress calls, no trace. The U.S. Navy immediately launched a massive search operation. Aircraft, ships, and sonar buoys fanned out across the Atlantic, scouring the submarine's planned route. Days turned into weeks, but the ocean gave nothing back. The Scorpion, along with her 99 crew members, had vanished somewhere between the Azores and the U.S. coast. For the families waiting in Norfolk, the silence was unbearable. One by one, the Navy's updates grew darker, the tone more resigned. By early June, the Scorpion was officially declared lost at sea, but behind the scenes, U.S. intelligence agencies were already chasing a lead. Just as in the case of the K-129, the Navy's SOSUS network, its secret array of underwater listening devices, had detected something. On May 22nd, hydrophones recorded a sequence of deep-water explosions near the Scorpion's last known position in the Atlantic. The acoustic data pointed to a violent event, an implosion consistent with a submarine collapsing. Under extreme pressure at depth, analysts traced the sounds to a location roughly 400 miles southwest of the Azores, more than 10,000 feet beneath the surface. By late October 1968, the wreck of the Scorpion was located. What investigators found raised more questions than it answered. The submarine's hull was crushed inward, resting in pieces across the ocean floor. The bow had been torn apart, and debris was scattered over hundreds of yards. There were no signs of fire or collision, no evidence of an external explosion. The Scorpion appeared to have been destroyed from within. The Navy's official conclusion was vague, a catastrophic failure caused by an internal event. But theories quickly spread. Some suggested a torpedo malfunction, where a defective weapon may have armed itself inside the launch tube, forcing the crew to attempt an emergency dive before it detonated. Others believed a battery explosion had triggered a chain reaction. dooming the vessel almost instantly. There were darker theories too, whispers of a Soviet ambush in retaliation for the loss of the K-129 earlier that year. Both nations had nuclear submarines operating in the same waters, and in the climate of the Cold War, mutual suspicion was constant. Some former intelligence officers even claimed the Scorpion had been on a secret mission to monitor Soviet naval activity, and may have been intercepted. The US Navy denied those claims, but internal reports declassified years later revealed that the Scorpion had indeed been suffering from mechanical and electrical issues before her final voyage. Maintenance logs described frequent malfunctions, including unreliable torpedoes and faulty safety systems. Despite those warnings, she was cleared to sail, under pressure to meet operational schedules during a tense period of Cold War escalation. Whatever the cause, what happened to the Scorpion was fast, silent, and fatal. The crew never had time to send a distress call. In a matter of seconds, the immense pressure of the deep Atlantic crushed the vessel, leaving nothing but fragments of steel and unanswered questions. 4 submarines, Israeli, French, Soviet, and American, gone within the same year. No survivors, no clear explanations. Even decades later, 1968 remains one of the most tragic and perplexing years in naval history. Some call it coincidence, a grim alignment of human error and bad luck. Others suspect patterns too precise to ignore. Perhaps a shared flaw in Cold War submarine design, or something else, something unseen. Whatever the truth, the ocean keeps its silence. The wrecks still rest where they fell, deep beneath the waves, hidden from the sun, each guarding its own piece of a mystery that may never be solved. The USS Scorpion last reported its position on May 21, 1968, and search teams quickly focused their efforts on the open waters southwest of the Azores. But the Atlantic is unimaginably vast, and finding even a trace of a lost submarine at such crushing depths was like searching for a single grain of sand in a desert. As days turned into weeks, the hope of finding the Scorpion intact began to fade. For the families of the 99 crew members, the waiting was unbearable, each sunrise a reminder that no new word had come. Then, after weeks of relentless searching, sonar finally detected something unusual, an anomaly deep beneath the waves. Investigators moved in, and soon the truth emerged. The wreck of the Scorpion lay 400 miles southwest of the Azores, resting more than 3,000 meters below the surface. When cameras descended into the dark, the images were heartbreaking. The submarine was broken in two. The hull was twisted and torn apart. The stern section was almost completely crushed, a brutal testament to the enormous pressure of the deep. Debris from the interior was scattered across the seabed, evidence of a catastrophic and instantaneous event. For the Navy, the discovery brought a grim sense of closure, but not understanding. The wreck answered the question of where, but not why. The official investigation concluded that the Scorpion was probably lost to an internal torpedo explosion. According to this theory, one of her own weapons malfunctioned and detonated inside the hull, setting off a chain reaction that destroyed the submarine in seconds. It was a plausible explanation, but far from certain. How could such a failure occur aboard one of the Navy's most advanced nuclear submarines? The crew was experienced, the systems sophisticated, and the vessel had passed inspection before departure. Something didn't add up. Other theories soon began to circulate. Declassified U.S. Navy documents revealed that just months before the Scorpion's disappearance, American intelligence had intercepted Soviet communications, suggesting that Soviet forces were tracking an American submarine. Could the Scorpion have been caught in a deadly game of underwater cat and mouse, intercepted, engaged, and destroyed in a covert clash that both superpowers later buried to avoid sparking open war? The possibility of a secret confrontation was explosive, but impossible to verify. Both sides had every reason to stay silent. An admission of such an encounter could have ignited a Cold War crisis. there was another, more mundane, but no less haunting explanation. The Scorpion had a long history of mechanical problems. She'd suffered repeated issues with her propulsion system, electrical circuits, and even her torpedo tubes during earlier deployments. Some believed these recurring flaws might have finally caught up with her, a slow, unseen failure that culminated in disaster thousands of feet below the surface. Whatever the cause, it happened too fast for anyone to react. 99 sailors aboard the USS Scorpion were lost in an instant. The wreck's discovery brought a measure of closure, but not the answers their families sought. The questions linger still, cold, heavy, and unanswered at the bottom of the sea, and the Scorpion was not alone. In the span of just 4 months, 4 submarines from 4 different nations vanished without explanation. Israel's INS Dakar, France's Minerve, the Soviet Union's K-129, and America's USS Scorpion. Each loss was different, each surrounded by its own fragments of evidence and theories, but all shared the same eerie silence. Was it all coincidence? A tragic series of unrelated accidents during a perilous time in naval history? Or was there something darker, something connecting them all beneath the surface of the world's oceans? What do you think happened? Was it Cold War sabotage, mechanical failure, or something far beyond what we understand? Share your theories in the comments. I'll be reading every one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most haunting mysteries, give the video a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe beneath the waves.